Good morning, everyone. I know that we had some technical issues this morning, and I'm really sorry that meant a lot of you missed out on the service. And we're going to make sure things are a lot better next week, because I really like the idea of live streaming and doing this, doing church together wherever we are. But what I thought I'd do is just take 10 minutes and re-record my sermon from this morning, just in case you'd like to catch up on that. So I'm preaching on Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 to 14, which was the first reading for the Eucharist this morning. So I'm not going to read that, but I'm going to hope that you know what I'm talking about, and you can do a quick catch up later. Exodus 32, 1 to 14. Now, I have to say that I really feel for the Israelites in this passage from the book of Exodus today. I mean, they've been on quite the roller coaster ride since those days back in Egypt when God said that God would set them free. They had seen God's power at work to free them and to lead them out of slavery. God had provided for them, guided them, given them what they needed. God had been a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If they didn't understand God, at least the Israelites knew God was there. And since they didn't quite have God figured out, they had Moses. He'd been like an intermediary, passing messages to God and back, leading the way, speaking for them and for God in the face of really difficult times. Moses had been the visible one all along. And although the Israelites were quite certain that it was God at work, Moses was the one they could see in front of them. So they get to this point in their wandering in the desert, and Moses goes up to the mountain to meet with God. And we're told in the book of Exodus that the Israelites start to get a bit worried because Moses has been gone for such a long time. And I feel like we should take a moment to acknowledge that he was gone for a long time. In fact, 12 of the chapters of Exodus are of Moses on top of the mountain and God giving him the new law. So we can almost understand that the people get a bit restless. Moses had been leading them, but Moses had gone and there was no sign of his return. We can imagine that they were afraid. They were out in the wilderness. They'd lost their human leader and they didn't really know who else to turn to for wisdom and guidance. So the Israelites went eventually to Aaron, Moses' brother, the guy Moses had left in charge. And they asked Aaron to make a god for them. To be fair on Aaron, it does sound a whole lot like the Israelites gathered against him and basically demanded some sort of god that they could see. And Aaron, feeling, I guess, somewhat bewildered, rather worried, a little concerned about settling the people and keeping the peace, concerned about what his leadership would look like if there was trouble. So Aaron heard their request and he agreed to it. The people gathered together all the gold that they had. Aaron melted it down and shaped it into this golden calf. And then he declared a festival to the Lord who brought them out of Egypt. Now, I don't know about you, but for as many times as I have read and reflected on this passage, I've always imagined that what was happening is that the Israelites and Aaron were making a golden calf which was a false god. But it seems like there's quite a lot of debate amongst biblical scholars about what exactly that golden calf was representing. Um, I've always thought that it meant that the Israelites were done with Moses and his God, and they were ready to move on to something or someone else. But some scholars say that actually, rather than this being an image of a false God, it was a false image of the true God. So that interpretation means that God's people haven't moved on to another God. They aren't walking away. They're clear that God was the one who led them out of Egypt. They just want a God they can see. They're out in the wilderness. They've left behind all that they knew. Even though it was brutal slavery in Egypt, there was still the comfort of it being familiar to them. They're not quite sure exactly where they're headed. God had been the one who had guided and provided for them every step of the way since they left Egypt. And now, not even Moses is around to figure things out and point the way. The Israelites knew that God had led them into freedom. They knew that they were God's people. They knew that God had a plan to lead them into the promised land, but they couldn't see God, and they wanted to. They wanted that comfort of knowing God was with them. They wanted a God who is tangible, a God they could see, touch, hear clearly. They were stuck in the wilderness, and they wanted the comfort of a God who was right there in front of them. So they gathered up the gold they had, and they made an idol, not another God necessarily, just something to hold their attention for a while and bring them comfort and strength. But of course, we know that it really was not a good move. God had made it clear that there was no other God but him. They wanted the comfort of being able to see God in front of them, but in the process, they had reduced God to the manageable size of an idol. God was understandably upset. Moses and God were still on the top of the mountain when this golden calf was being erected by Aaron. And so Moses and God have this discussion about whose people they actually are. Moses says, "These are your people, God." And God says, "These are your people, Moses, who you brought out of Egypt." And God says, "I'm going to get rid of them all. I'm going to write them off and start again just with you, Moses, and your descendants." And Moses says, "God, that really, really wouldn't be good for your reputation. Imagine what the Egyptians would say if you wiped out your people. You've gone to all the trouble of freeing them from slavery, and now and then the Egyptians will be able to say they were led out of slavery into the wilderness, into freedom, just so God could obliterate them." Moses suggested that God forgive his people. And there was some discussion, and in the end, God relented. So we might think that this is kind of a once-off story about God and God's people and an idol on the side. But of course, this story plays itself out over and over again in our lives and in the lives of God's people, because there are times in life when we really would like a God we can see, a God we can touch and hear, a God not somewhere close by, but right here, visible in front of us. The problem is that there is this human tendency to recast God in our own image. We reduce God in order to make God more manageable. We make an idol, and suddenly we have a God we can not only see and touch, but also a God we can control. a God who likes the same things we like, a God who hates the same people we hate, a God who has the same priorities for us and our world, a God who is always on our side. And that God is not God. That God is a false image. And even if it's supposed to be an image of the true God, it isn't, because no one can capture the life, the spirit, and the depth of love of this God in gold or stone or bronze. That's just attempting to trap God just the way we would like God to be. In Psalm 115, the psalmist says, "Why do the nations say, 'Where is their God?' Our God is in heaven. He does whatever pleases him. But their idols are silver and gold made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them." Those are some powerful words. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. When we make an idol of God, when we try to reduce God, to make God more manageable, we imprison ourselves in models of stone and clay too. Like the Israelites discovered in the end, our only real option is to let God be God. And when we let God be God, we are free to be who we were made to be, not trapped in one way of thinking or one way of being, not lifeless, not still and unchanging, but full of spirit and fire and longing and grace and growing and understanding and asking questions and getting totally lost in the wilderness and being found again, and all the while coming to love God for who God is, on God's terms, not ours. When we set God free to be God, we set ourselves free to be us. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope that it's been a good little message for you. Again, sorry about this morning, and we'll hope that everything is sorted so that next